Good afternoon, good morning. My name is Britt Parker, and I'm with the National Integrated Drought Information System, or NIDIS, with NOAA in Boulder, Colorado. Welcome to this informational session on the Climate Program Office FY22 Coping with Drought Competition on Building Tribal Drought Resilience. I serve as the manager for this competition, and I am joined today by Viva DeHaza, the Executive Director of NIDIS. Please note this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Climate Program Office FY22 Federal Opportunity and Drought.gov websites, along with a transcript of the webinar and a frequently asked questions generated through the Q&A portion of our webinar today. This FAQ will periodically be updated with questions that come in so that all can benefit from the answers. And in the chat box, I've put links to the notice of funding opportunity, as well as the information sheet for this competition, and the website on Drought.gov, where you can find all the information as well as the recording. We are holding this webinar in advance of the letter of intent due date as an opportunity to clarify the focus and requirements of this competition, as well as answer your questions. Our goal is to be as clear and consistent with the information we are providing as possible. We will take questions at the end of this presentation, though you may enter your questions at any time in the Q&A box on your control panel. Today, I will briefly cover the following topics. What is the Climate Program Office at NOAA? What is NIDIS? Some important details about the NIDIS Coping with Drought competition. I'll briefly go over application requirements, important dates, and then we'll open it up for questions. The NOAA Climate Program Office manages competitive research programs in which NOAA funds high-priority climate science, assessment, decision support research, outreach, education, and capacity-building activities designed to advance our understanding of the Earth's climate system, and to foster the application of this knowledge in risk management and adaptation efforts. The National Integrated Drought Information System sits within the Climate Program Office, and the FY22 Coping with Drought competitions are one of 8 competitions currently open for FY22, or fiscal year 22. Please note there are 2 NIDIS competitions this year. This one focused on building tribal drought resilience, and a second focused on ecological drought. The informational webinar on the ecological drought competition was held yesterday, and all materials will also be on the Climate Program Office and Drought.gov websites if you are curious about that competition. The National Integrated Drought Information System was authorized in 2006 and is a multi-agency partnership that coordinates drought monitoring, forecasting, planning, and research at national, state, and local levels across the country. The mission of NIDIS is to help the nation move to an increasingly proactive approach to understand and manage drought risks and impacts, and to improve long-term drought resilience with a mandate to establish a national early warning system. Since its inception, NIDIS has been working with various federal, state, local, and tribal government agencies, as well as a network of researchers, academics, resource managers, and policymakers to support efforts to improve prediction, forecasting, and monitoring, and collaborating with existing programs and partners to undertake applied research and drought planning and preparedness. We share this work and collate drought resources on the U.S. Drought portal at Drought.gov. While our ultimate goal is a national early warning system, we recognize that impacts and information needs differ across the country. So our approach to achieve this goal is to develop regional drought early warning systems, networks of partners sharing information and actions that help communities cope with drought. Each DOOS has many of the same basic ingredients: OBS and monitoring, predictions and forecasting, planning and preparedness, outreach and communication, and applied research, but ultimately have their own flavor to reflect the needs of their region. These systems are not simply in place to disseminate forecasts and information, but to encourage innovation by integrating new, locally relevant drought information and supporting the introduction of new technologies that detect and communicate drought risks and warnings. In addition, we encourage learning across these drought early warning systems and value projects and approaches that are transferable. There are currently 9 drought early warning systems across the U.S., covering the continental U.S. west of the Mississippi, the Midwest, the Northeast, and the Southeast. We are also working to strengthen our support to partners in areas such as Alaska, Hawaii and the Pacific Islands, the U.S. Caribbean, and other areas that are not part of a formal DEWS. NIDIS recognizes that tribal communities face unique drought challenges and opportunities, require customized approaches, tools, and data that may integrate traditional tribal knowledge and cultural, medicinal, and spiritual values. It is also recognized that Indigenous experiences and perspectives of drought vary greatly across the United States. To effectively address tribal needs as mandated by the NIDIS public law, NIDIS and partners jointly developed the NIDIS Tribal Drought Engagement Strategy in consultation with tribal partners. This strategy identifies key activities to implement in partnership with tribal nations over the next 5 years. Integrating tribal perspectives into NIDIS's work is important to ensure tribal nations are equal partners in responding to drought. The document also presents guiding principles of engagement that NIDIS strives to adhere to in our engagement with tribal nations. These include respecting tribal sovereignty, ensuring trust and reciprocity, and ensuring the drought early warning systems are culturally appropriate and useful for tribal nations. Over the past few years, tribal nations have made significant advances in their drought planning activities. Many tribal nations have developed drought or climate change risk assessments and/or action plans. Yet many tribal resource managers have expressed frustration by the lack of adequate funding for implementation of actions to build tribal drought resilience embedded within those plans. Additionally, assessing the feasibility and efficacy of these actions from the tribal perspective is critical to ensuring that lessons are learned and shared. This opportunity is intended to contribute to the larger effort to address this gap between planning and implementation. Information about the Climate Program Office Notice of Funding Opportunity, including the 8 competitions that are part of this opportunity, can be found on the Climate Program Office webpage under the Funding Opportunities tab. This information is also on Drought.gov. So the focus of the FY22 Coping with Drought, Building Tribal Drought Resilience competition is applications that are developed by or in full partnership with tribal nations to fund the implementation of actions together with research on those actions to build drought resilience contained within existing plans or strategies. Plans may include, but are not limited to, drought contingency plans, drought, water, or natural resource management plans, agricultural resource management plans, or climate adaptation plans. Projects could include, but again are not limited to, green infrastructure, application of techniques to improve soil health, diversification of cropping, installation of fish ladders or maintaining fish refugia, expansion of tools or response options for fish and wildlife managers, cultural or native plant range expansion or nurseries, ecosystem or landscape restoration, plans or education to increase drought-tolerant plant use for homes, farms, and ranches, or additional planning and research in advance of implementation of actions. There must be some research component to the proposed projects. That could include, but is not limited, to the following exemplar questions. So the first example, what metrics will you use to know when you are in drought, drought is worsening, or drought is improving? For example, observe changes in plant or animal behavior, landscape changes that indicate drought. How will these feed into monitoring and evaluation of the action you're implementing? The second example, how can a monitoring and evaluation process be designed and implemented that incorporates traditional ecological knowledge or traditional knowledge and/or cultural values to define and assess the success of the action to build drought resilience? What metrics will you use to understand whether drought impacts have been reduced or minimized based on your actions? A third example, are planning processes and implementation of actions that adhere to traditional ways of knowledge and adapting more effective? How is the effectiveness of these processes and actions defined and captured? Some additional examples include, is there a consideration of observed or future trends, climate change, land use, population, etc., in the actions to build drought resilience? And if not, how might the actions be adapted to incorporate these trends to increase the likelihood of success? A fifth example, what processes or criteria are used to determine which actions to undertake and where they should be implemented? For example, what approaches, tools, metrics, and/or analyses were used or need to be developed to understand the full range of benefits and costs, inclusive of traditional knowledge and cultural, ecological, and other values of importance of potential actions? And the final example, how can this project improve and document our understanding of the cultural, economic, human health, ecological, and/or other costs or impacts of drought? We welcome proposals that leverage previous or ongoing work related to climate and drought vulnerability assessments and planning, such as those funded under the BIA Tribal Resilience Grants or the Department of Interior Climate Adaptation Science Centers, etc. Again, two examples, but not limited to those programs. Please note that proposals may address one or more of these research questions and other related research questions, but applicants are not expected to, nor should they try to address them all. Moving into some of the specifics of this competition, pending the availability of funds, NIDIS anticipates a funding allocation for this competition of up to $1.5 million. Proposals may request funding for up to 2-year grants in the form of cooperative agreements with funding of up to $500,000 over the 2 years. We anticipate funding 5 to 7 projects, and applicants should use September 1 of 2022 as the start date. So some guidelines for applicants. Project funds will be awarded as cooperative agreements. And let me just make sure, okay. Project funds will be awarded as cooperative agreements, thus ensuring a working partnership and substantial interaction between the project PIs and the NIDIS program, NOAA scientists, and other relevant staff. Projects will be expected to submit annual reports and respond to periodic data and information requests, including quarterly calls, to ensure co-production. Some of our most successful work to date has been accomplished when we work together with our partners, and we're looking forward to working closely with our PIs under this competition. So there are some requirements for applications. Proposals will demonstrate full partnership of tribal nations by including at least one full primary investigator on the project representing a federally recognized tribe. Proposals will demonstrate an integrated project team with or considering partners from the public and private sectors, academia to include tribal colleges and universities, local, regional, tribal, and federal governmental entities, non-governmental organizations, environmental groups, intertribal council and consortia, tribal allottee organizations, citizen groups, etc. Proposals should demonstrate adherence to the guiding principles of tribal engagement as defined in the NIDIS Tribal Engagement Strategy, which include, again, respecting tribal sovereignty, ensuring trust and reciprocity, and ensuring drought-related work is culturally appropriate and useful for the tribal nations. And finally, as part of the description of the project activities, we must have provided detailed information on the activities to be conducted, locations, sites, timeline, including seasons, species and habitats that may be affected, possible construction activities, and any environmental concerns that may exist, as NOAA must analyze the potential environmental impacts as required by the National Environmental Protection Protection Act. Proposals may demonstrate external contributions, for example, in-kind contributions and/or funding, to be leveraged with those federal research funds, though there is no match or cost share requirement of this grant. So I'll repeat, there's no requirement for match or cost share under this competition. Proposals may demonstrate leverage of previous or ongoing work related to climate and drought vulnerability assessments and planning, such as those that may have been funded under the BIA Tribal Resilience grants or the Department of Interior Climate Adaptation Science Centers, etc. Additionally, project teams will be encouraged to work with the new NIDIS tribal coordinator to share outcomes and lessons learned with other tribal nations and tribal organizations where appropriate to strengthen national tribal drought preparedness and response. So eligible applicants are institutes of higher education, other nonprofits, commercial organizations, international organizations, and state, local, and tribal governments. For this competition, it's extremely important to read and follow the guidelines for the requirement for a U.S. federally recognized tribal government involvement. In addition, please see subsection G under submission requirements of the full Notice of Funding Opportunity for additional information regarding federal investigators or co-investigators. Federal agencies or institutions, while not eligible to receive federal assistance under this notice, can send their proposals to the competition manager using the same instructions and requirements to be evaluated by the same process and criteria. If the proposal receives a high enough score through the process, federal agencies would receive funding through an interagency transfer versus a cooperative agreement mechanism. So a federal agency could be a partner on a proposed project. I will now briefly cover the letters of intent and full proposals. Please again see the full Notice of Federal Funding Opportunity documentation on grants.gov to read the full details and ensure you meet all the requirements. In addition, please ensure you are familiar with the administrative and national policy requirements to which each grantee will be subject. Investigators are strongly encouraged to submit their letter of intent prior to developing and submitting a full proposal using the FY22 Coping with Drought LOI submission form, a link to which is located in the information sheet for this competition. Investigators unable to submit via the form should email their LOI to me, Britt Parker, at NOAA.gov. If you email your LOI, you will receive confirmation of receipt. If you do not, please follow up with me. The letters of intent are due at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and that's Eastern Time, not local time to you, very important, on August 9th of 2021. The purpose of the letter intent process is to provide information to potential applicants on the relevance of their proposed project to the competition in advance of preparing a full application. Once LOIs are strongly encouraged, while LOIs are strongly encouraged, applicants are not required to submit them and may submit a full application even if they have not submitted a letter of intent. If a letter of intent is submitted, it should contain the following: competition name, tentative project title, names and institutions of the PIs, a problem statement, brief summary of the work to be completed, including methodology, data sets needed to be collected, approximate cost, and relevance to the competition being targeted. If these items are not included or your letter of intent is submitted late, it will not be considered. Responses to the primary investigators will be sent within 4 weeks after the LOI due date, with an encourage or discourage from applying, though the final decision on whether to submit a full proposal lies with the primary investigator. Full proposals are due at 5 p.m. Eastern on October 18th of 2021. Failure to comply with the provisions in the Notice of Funding Opportunity for full proposals will result in applications being returned without review. So it's really important to read and follow the instructions. Full applications are limited to 35 pages, single-spaced, using 12-point font type with 1-inch margins on standard 8.5 by 11 paper. For proposals with 3 or more primary investigators, that page limit goes up to 40. The required components of a full proposal include the following: title page, abstract, any results from prior research, a project narrative, budget narrative and table, abbreviated detail or resume of the primary investigators, current or pending support for the primary investigators, a data and information sharing plan, and a statement of diversity and inclusion. Other components that are not included in the page limit include federal budget forms, indirect cost rate agreements, the DUNS number, and letters of support if you have them. Special instructions for multiple applications with the same project are included in the body of the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Please do not wait until the last minute to access grants online to submit your proposal, as this process can take as long as 4 weeks if steps are not completed correctly. The letters of intent are subject to a program-led review based on relevance to the targeted competition. Upon receipt of full application, an administrative review will be completed for compliance with requirements and completeness. Those that pass will proceed to an independent panel technical review for 3 criteria: technical and scientific merit and the overall qualifications of the applicant. Each reviewer will provide 1 score for each criterion from 1 to 5. These scores will be combined using the weighting averages to produce a single numerical score for this step. More information on the weighting of the criterion at this step can be found in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Projects scoring at least 3 out of 5 will proceed to an independent panel review for importance, relevance, and applicability to program goals, where each reviewer will provide a relevance score from 1 to 5. To determine final score, the scores from the technical review will be combined with the relevance review with a weighting of 60% and 40% respectively. Before we wrap up, as I mentioned earlier, NIDIS is offering a second Coping with Drought competition in FY22 focused on ecological drought. Applications will be accepted on research to improve our understanding, early warning, and management of drought risk in terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems to inform more deliberate and expanded decision-making that supports sustainable, healthy, and resilient ecosystems. The competition will focus on 2 areas: improving our ability to understand drought impacts to ecosystems and ecologically available water, and integrating that information into decision-making, and 2, integrating ecologically relevant information to support drought monitoring, planning, and action. Finally, a reminder for where you can find the full Notice of Funding Opportunity and the Coping with Drought Tribal Drought Resilience information sheet. Please read these resources thoroughly to ensure you understand fully the focus and requirements for your proposals. A transcript of this presentation, the slide deck, and a frequently asked questions based on your questions today will be available on the CPO Funding Opportunities website as well as Drought.gov. And we will update the FAQ based on additional questions that come in. Please contact me at any time with additional questions. We will now move to the Q&A portion of the webinar. Please go ahead and type your questions into the Q&A box and we'll start to work through them. Thank you. Okay, so we'll give it a couple minutes for questions to start coming in, and it looks like we have our first one. Let me open this up. Yes, so will this brief be posted? If so, where? It will be posted, and it will be, you will be able to find it both on the NOAA Climate Program Office FY22 funding opportunity page under competition number 8. You will also be able to find it on the Drought.gov Coping with Drought webpage, and I put that in the chat box at the beginning of the beginning of the presentation. If you've registered for the webinar, which obviously you have if you're with us, you'll also receive an email with links to all of the materials from the webinar today. The next question is the 1.5 million assigned to this competition only for tribal projects? And yes, that is correct. So each of the 2 competitions have an assigned total value that we plan to give out through the competition, and for the tribal projects, that is a total of 1.5 million. Are there any other questions? Is it okay to work with a tribal college or university as a co-PI? And I would say yes, it's absolutely okay for a tribal college or university to be a co-PI. The intent of this project or this competition is to fund on-the-ground projects to help build tribal drought resilience. And so obviously we would want to see very close integration and partnership with the tribal nations whose land the project will occur. So while you can absolutely have a co-PI as a tribal college and university, if the project is taking place on tribal lands, which it should, I would think. I mean, maybe there's a possibility of one that is adjacent, et cetera, or on an important land area. We also want to see that representation as well to ensure that this is done in full partnership and lockstep with the tribal nation with whom you're working. And does the LOI have to be signed by a tribal council? So that is going to really, I think, depend on the tribe itself, the governance structure, and what is required to implement a project on tribal lands, if that makes sense. And if that doesn't, please follow up with an additional question. And then another question is, what is the purpose of the letter of intent? So the letter of intent is a rather short document, no more than 2 pages, which is going to give us an idea of what you are proposing under the project, under the competition. And what we'll be evaluating is whether or not the idea for the project does in fact fit the scope of this competition. And our hope is that we can, 1, provide some initial feedback on key aspects of the requirements for the competition that maybe haven't been thought about. Obviously, this is a very short document, so it's not going to be, comprehensive in listing all the partners or the way they'll be engaged, but it'll give us an idea of what you're thinking about, so we can provide some initial feedback, and perhaps more importantly, provide feedback that, no, in fact, while the idea may be great, it just doesn't fit under the scope of this competition, and therefore, we don't waste your time in putting together what is a comprehensive application, and we also don't get applications in that then waste the time of our staff and the review panel and those who take part and volunteer for the review panel if it just doesn't fit within the scope of the competition. So again, please follow up if that does not fully answer your question. So the next question is, can projects take place specifically on federal lands, given the land is crucial to adjacent tribal nations? And I would welcome, Viva, your thoughts on this as well. My initial thought on that question is potentially, it would depend on what the what federal agency manages that land, and if it's within the the scope of what can be done on the federal land. If there is work proposed on federal land, I would certainly expect to see that federal agency who is managing those lands be, partner on that project. Viva, did you have any other thoughts on that question?
No, I think you answered it well. I'm intrigued by this question, but I think you answered the question well.
Okay. Any other questions? I see some thank yous for answers, so that's great. Hopefully that means we're clarifying for you the questions that you do have. We'll give it a couple more minutes and see if any other questions come through. Great. Give it one more minute, but I don't see anything new coming through. Okay, so I think we will go ahead then. Oh, there we go. Can the funding be used to implement green infrastructure? Yes, it can. That certainly, as long as the action you want to implement or the green infrastructure project that you want to implement as part of an existing plan, that's not a problem at all. Again, especially at the full proposal stage, we'll just need to know, exactly where, when, and how that project is going to be implemented so that we can look at the NEPA considerations, the environmental impacts of the project, and just ensure that we're approaching that right. Anything else before we wrap up? Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. If you do decide to submit a letter of intent or an application under this competition, we wish you the best of luck and in the process, and we look forward to seeing what projects come in, and look forward to working with those who are successful moving forward in the future. So thank you for taking the time today to join, and please, again, feel free to follow up with me at any time if other questions come up. So thank you very much, and have a good rest of your Thursday.